Hi guys, so today's episode is going to be about a character known as D.B. Cooper. He was a suspected plane hijacker in the early 1970s. It's unclear if that was his original name or it was just a name that he used for his particular heist. And it's kind of an interesting case. The FBI has released its files on the internet, so you can look up some of the information that they have over there. But basically, it's relatively sparse because it was a short episode in terms of how long the heist actually took. And it was a situation where nobody knew whatever happened to him. So let's begin. This is from Vintage News. So this is the only unsolved skyjacking case in U.S. history. And there may be a break in the case a little later. The image that you have is the composite image that they were able to create from the flight attendants and whoever, they were able to, the ticket counter people and the various people that might have seen him or at least had some interaction with him during that flight. Okay, so we will go to the next picture. Okay, on November 24th, 1971, on a rainy afternoon in Portland, Oregon, a man approached the flight counter of Northwest Orient Airlines. He wore a dark raincoat, a dark suit with a skinny black tie, a neatly pressed white shirt, and loafers. He appeared to be in his 40s, nearly 6 feet tall, with receding hair. He looked like a business executive, witnesses said later. And this is just an image of, some actor, but basically they really did not have, a tremendous amount of information because at the time somebody just buying a ticket, no one's really paying that much attention, at least maybe not during the early 70s. Okay, so let's go to the next. Using the name Dan Cooper, he used cash to purchase a one-way ticket to Seattle on Flight 305. The man who carried a black attaché case sat in the last row of the Boeing 727 for the 30-minute flight, seat 18C. He ordered a bourbon and soda. After the plane took off, he handed an attractive flight attendant a note, which she slipped into her pocket and ignored. A bit later, when the flight attendant passed by him again, the man leaned towards her and whispered, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." With that, the legend of D.B. Cooper was born. Hours later, in the Seattle Tacoma airport, the rest of that sentence was that Cooper changed his appearance. Cooper was now wearing sunglasses, boarded a second plane empty of passengers, and with only a flight crew he showed the flight attendant on the first plane the bomb in his attaché case, and she conveyed the note's contents to the pilot. His instructions had been followed. He now had 4 parachutes and a briefcase containing 200 in $20 bills. What he did not know was, while the plane circled the Seattle airport, FBI agents photographed the money. It was now nighttime, and rain was getting heavier. The man had more detailed orders to be followed. The plane would follow a southeast course to Mexico City at the minimum airspeed possible at a maximum 10,000-foot altitude. The landing gear would have to remain deployed during takeoff and the cabin be depressurized. As with all of his communications, he was quite So this is actually a street performer who is in full makeup and pretending to be D.B. Cooper. So this is a very, famous case. I don't know that people are as familiar with it now, but this guy was standing on the street. Extensive searches on the ground found no trace of Cooper, his parachute, or the money. The FBI says, calling it NORJAC for Northwest Hijacking. We interviewed hundreds of people, tracked leads across the nation, and scoured the aircraft for evidence. By the 5-year anniversary of the hijacking, we'd considered more than 800 suspects and eliminated all but 24 from consideration. It is one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in FBI history. Despite theories put forth in books, documentaries, symposiums, and an enthusiastic website, no one has proven the identity of D.B. Cooper, a journalist mistakenly turned Dan into D.B., and it stuck. None of the photographed money turned up until 1980, when a boy found 3 backpacks of money in a river in Vancouver, Washington, and it had apparently the $20 bills in there. Very, they were definitely just almost like debris, at the level of just being debris because of what they, however many years they had been, I guess 9 years they had been in the water, and they were pretty much falling apart, but I think they still had their serial codes on there, so they were able to identify that that was the money. So one of the most widely believed theories was that Cooper died in his audacious jump from the plane. He had a parachute that couldn't be steered. He jumped at night with a heavily wooded area in the rain, in clothes certainly not practical for such an act. On July 8th, 2016, the FBI announced that it had redirected resources allocated to the D.B. Cooper case in order to focus on other investigative priorities. But in late January 2018, a startling claim was made to the media. D.B. Cooper was actually a former CIA operative named Robert Rackstraw, alive and well and living in Southern California. A team of private investigators hired by TV producer Tom Colbert that had been working on the mystery for several years said they cracked a code proving the infamous hijacker is, in fact, a man who has ties to the San Diego area named Robert Rackstraw, and he is still alive. Rackstraw is a decorated Vietnam War veteran and, according to the investigators, an ex-CIA operative. The code was contained in a December 11th, 1971 letter the cold case team got their hands on that they say was sent by D.B. Cooper to several major news outlets. The taunting letter, which the newspapers did not publish at the time and officials said was a prank, was obtained through the Freedom of Information Act. The letter, which went to the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Seattle Times, and the Washington Post, contained strings of letters and numbers at the bottom of the page, according to the Seattle Times. A code breaker on Colbert's team, Rick Sherwood, was able to decode the letters and numbers. The code breaker found that the code that was used was the particular code that was used by the army units that Rackstraw was associated with in Vietnam. The encryption was meant to serve as a signal to those in his units who knew the code that he was alive and well after the jump. Colbert said he also taunted law enforcement by including SWS in the letter, which stands for Special Warfare School. So this is from the FBI's bulletin of the images, the two, most notable, the one on the first plane where he didn't have glasses, and then the second one where he was wearing the records he obtained through Freedom of Information Act showed detailed skill sets Rickstraw received from Green Berets in 1968, including 400 hours of Special Forces classes, HALO, high altitude, low opening parachuting, and psychological operations, PSYOPs, and other training. In addition to claiming to have found the real D.B. Cooper, Colbert said that he has strong evidence that the FBI deliberately worked to keep the hijacking case unsolved due to Rickstraw's CIA ties. Although his CIA employment is not confirmed, Rackstraw 74 was not an angel by any definition. He was charged with murdering his stepfather, but acquitted in a trial in 1978. He once reportedly tried to fake his own death by using a Mayday call and bailing out of a rented plane. It quickly unraveled. He was even arrested in Iran and deported back to the United States, which certainly doesn't happen every day. According to the Washington Post, he faced charges of aircraft theft, possession of explosives, and check fraud. Colbert said Rackstraw was convicted and spent more than a year in jail before being released in 1980. Rackstraw's attorney said that he couldn't confirm those details. Those that feel that D.B. Cooper was Rackstraw will just have to continue on with their conspiracy theories because he never admitted to being this individual. I mean, if he did, he would have all of these extra charges on him. So he's definitely not going to say that. When tracked down recently by a TV crew, Rackstraw, when asked if he was the real D.B. Cooper, said, "What difference would it make?" Rackstraw's attorney has said that he denies any part in the skyjacking. He was 28 at the time of the skyjacking, and one of the original flight attendants, when shown photos of Rackstraw, said he did not resemble the man she saw on the plane in 1971. So that was the end of that particular article on D.B. Cooper, or possibly his name might be Rackstraw. Anyway, it's a very interesting case because not only is it an issue of it not being solved, but there are some other things that need to be considered because first of all, I've never heard of a situation where the FBI or law enforcement does exactly what the hijacker wants them to do. So here's a guy who gets on a plane, shows the attendant this note. Okay, fine. So then she, contacts the pilot. The pilot contacts the station down below and says these are his demands. He wants 3 parachutes. He wants 3 bags of money in $20 bills equaling $200,000. And I can't remember what else. He had a specific flight plan that he wanted. He also wanted the plane to land in Seattle, to let go of all of the passengers. Now, it's possible that just because he had made this sort of deal with them that I'll let go of all of the passengers if I get, these 3 things that I want. That may be the reason, but generally, I mean, as far as the movies are concerned, you never see that they are agreeing to the demands of a hijacker. Okay, fine. So they get him everything that he wants. He gets onto the other plane in Seattle. Nobody tries to arrest him. Nothing like that happens. There's no ambush. He even offered to pay for the flight attendant and the pilot's meals at the Seattle airport. He also wanted fuel. That was the other thing. There were, I guess, 4 requests. Okay, so he got everything that he wanted. The parachutes, the money. And at that time, I guess they didn't use that ink, that exploding ink that they always show that in films anyway, that there's some sort of a dye that if you open the money, then the bag of money, then it just, you can't numbers on the bill, so they generally would not be able to be, used, or if they were used, they could probably track the purchases or whatever. So, this is a strange situation that he then jumps onto the other plane, has all of his gear. It's an empty flight. It just has the flight attendant and the two pilots. He's very nice to them the whole time. I think he was sitting in the front with them, and he told them to fly at 10,000, at around 10,000 feet, so that his plan was that he was going to jump, and once they got to a particular area close to Mexico City, he exited the plane with the parachutes. Now the weird thing is, the parachutes and all of that paraphernalia was not found right at that time. The money bag was found about 9 years later, all the way up in Vancouver, Washington. So yes, it could have traveled, through, I guess, by way of the Pacific Ocean all the way up there. But I'm now a little suspicious if that money wasn't actually dropped at an earlier point. I don't know. It's a little suspicious, but the 3 bags of money were found together, so I guess they were tied together. Now, when you're dropping stuff from a plane, you're not going to drop them right at the same time as it's jumping, so there's going to be a little discrepancy as to where each item is going to land. And if he's, the plane is going very fast, and he's jumping into a wooded area. It's just kind of weird that the money was together. The bundles of money were together, but they had traveled all the way up. Okay, that's the other part of that, which is a little suspicious, is if this is this Rackstraw character, and he was a member of the PsyOps team, it's totally possible that he never really had any plans of keeping that money, and that this was actually a full operation that was done to get a certain amount of public exposure. Like I said, it's the most famous skyjacking case, unsolved, and then this guy turns out to be an agent. If it's the same guy, he does have all of the training to do this exact kind of mission, meaning he's trained in low-level parachute jumping and PsyOps and all of these other things, and the fact that everyone is cooperating with him, that's what I think is kind of bizarre. So I do have a feeling that this might have been a government, PsyOps of one organization, using one of their agents to play out a scenario, because what happened right after this was airlines then were required to check everyone's bags before boarding a flight. So legislation came in right after this based on this case, because, he had this bomb in a briefcase which had not been checked by the, I guess nobody was checking bags at that time. I don't know. But, he was the point of showing it to the flight attendant, and nobody else saw it. That was the other thing, because when he did show the bomb initially, there were other passengers on the plane. So, there are some issues with this particular story. I don't think the flight attendant and the pilots were involved, but I do think that something is going on in terms of like a possible government PsyOps with this particular case, because, like I said, legislation came about right afterwards. It was super famous right at the time. And then when a supposed letter is sent to all of these major newspapers, all of the newspapers cooperatively decide that they're not going to publish it, which is bizarre in its own, right? Why one of them should have published it, and that particular specific code to tell people only in his unit that, he was alive and well. What would be the point of even doing that? Like, are they in on it? They didn't make any money from this case. Why does he need to tell them unless it is an actual mission that only a select group of people knew about? And they all knew that it was him completing it. I just have a feeling this is a government psyops, just because he does work for that particular group. This Rackstraw character works for that group, and everything that he trained for was specifically to complete this particular mission paid for by the government, and that the government cannot seemingly, locate this guy, but then a TV producer was able to locate him. So I kind of do think that the Rackstraw is the D.B. Cooper character. I don't know why there's such a discrepancy in the age where the ticket person is saying he looked 40, but at the time he was 28. He could have been wearing makeup. There are a lot of possibilities, but it does seem like there's a little bit too much cooperation from the authorities to help this guy complete his heist, and then they were not able to solve the case, and then the money was clearly not something that, the money was dropped. I think the money was dropped actually at an earlier location, which leads me to think that this was not about money. This was just about completing a certain job so that it would become a very famous case and require this bag checking situation that was not a requirement before, and it probably would have caused a bit of an uproar in the early 70s because people might have been embarrassed about what they were taking in their bags and all kinds of issues. But when you make it a security issue, everything changes. Just like when 9/11 happened, suddenly security at airports became dramatically increased. And even when that shoe bomber situation occurred, if you remember that one, suddenly we all had to take our shoes off at the airport right after that. That particular, I should probably do a story on that case. That guy, there were also rumors that he was a CIA agent. I forgot his name, whatever that shoe bomber character was, but so I don't know if that case has any further conclusions. I haven't looked at it recently, but this D.B. Cooper one does seem like it was probably a possible mission done by an agent in order to bring about legislation, and it did right away. Then it became a standard procedure to check everyone's bags, and I guess I'm not sure when the X-ray machines started, becoming a standardized feature within all of the airports, but obviously it is now. Now I understand that's a useful thing to do, but sometimes the government, without just trying to enforce certain legislation, like just making a bold statement that this is what we're going to do now in order to prevent backlash from the public and make the thing go a lot smoother and faster, an event is placed within the public sphere just before then that convinces everybody without a tremendous amount of effort that this is a necessary thing. That people could be bringing bombs on planes. I guess nobody had even thought of something like that prior to this, but now it's like a normal consideration. And like I said, all of the cooperation that went into this case, and the fact that this guy, if it is the same guy, continues living his normal life. I mean, more or less, he apparently got into a couple of situations, but he kept getting out of those situations too. That's the other thing. He is, arrested for murdering his stepfather, but he gets out of that. And then he also gets into a situation in Iran, but then Iran sends him back. I mean, a lot of these things, he's clearly someone who works for the government, that he has a certain amount of pull. But I wonder if this was also one of his jobs that he had to do case, I'm just wondering if something like this was done on purpose, just to bring that particular, legislation into place very smoothly, because the case became super famous, but then was left completely, unresolved. Yet it was sort of figured out by a TV producer, meaning how is it possible that the FBI, with all of their resources, couldn't figure out the same information that a TV producer was able to figure out 20 years later? Some suspicious points about this, but anyway, this is the famous case of D.B. Cooper, or the man known as D.B. Cooper. His last name could be Rackstraw, and he could be an agent, and this could be an entire psyops. So I guess you'll just